Hello and welcome to Learn Data. It's great to have you on this channel. I'm Nilesh, and in this exciting video, we are going to look at a project in handwritten recognition, classification, or clustering. So, these are the points we'll go over, not necessarily in the same order, but that's kind of the uh, idea of this video. I'll walk you through how the data is created. Then I'll walk you through how what the code is and explain the code. And I'll put the link for the code that you can download it so you can follow along. So the idea of the video is to classify images that are handwritten text images. So in this video, I've selected the Devanagari script, which is used in present day Hindi language. And the reason why I chose because I can write in Hindi, and this is my handwriting that you can see up top here, and below is the printed letters for each of those alphabets. And so the idea then, if you need more information on this, I'd suggest this particular site, Wikipedia. It has more information on this one, the script, the ancient language. So what I've done is written each character or each alphabet on a page 704 times. So as you can see on the left hand side, then the code here is the magnified view of that page. The code then reads each of these pages and crops each alphabet or each character from that image and saves it as a separate JPEG image. So from each of these pages, we get 704 individual images, and so there are total 12 pages, so one for each character or each alphabet, and multiplied by 704, so we have a total data set of 8448 images. So it can be used as a clustering problem or a classification problem. So we can aim to find 12 clusters or 12 classes. And here is the image data folder structure. So handwriting, that's the main for project folder that I'm saving all the files in. And these A, B, C, D all the way up to L except the data folder, those are the files you can download from the link that I'll provide in the description, or you can create each of these pages. And I'll talk about how to create those pages in a minute. And then these subfolders within data are created using the code which saves each of these series of images for each alphabet in a separate folder. So we have 12 alphabets or 12 characters, and we have 12 folders right here. So how do we then create the text or images? So I have a video that I would like to share. So here what I've done is this. I'm using it in Clip Studio, but you could use any other software, drawing software or sketching software. What you want to do is place a grid as shown here, and then in each of the grid you can write the text. It could be any language of your choice, or it could be symbols, or it could be any characters that you want to analyze. And so that's how the data is created. So you have this entire page of characters handwritten, and once uh, try to get around 1000, but the page I could fit 700, 704, and that was sufficient. So total images is still 8000. So the way the algorithm works to crop each of these images from this larger page is that the spacing between, you see this grid line, so that's what is used as a marker to split that particular, the spacing is used as a marker. So I'm not detecting any of the text within this particular page. So all I'm doing in that case is simply uh, cropping this image by pixels. So first I think it is 70 pixels or 70, adding those and going like that. So these are square images that are saved. And if you write, if you do not want to write on a screen, another alternative is that you can write on a piece of paper, white blank paper, and before writing you can draw grids with pencil, and after writing you can erase those grid marks, and then if you can, I'd suggest scanning the paper on a scanner. If you cannot, then you could take a picture by cell phone and use that image in for processing. And I'll tell you what you would need to work out when you process that image to get the code working. So with that, then these are the labels that will be assigned to each of these characters that we have in the data set. So let's get started and look at the code. Here in Jupyter Notebook, I've already written the code because it's a long project. Uh, here is some information. You can use any language, symbols, any artwork. So these are just the steps that I talked about. You could write, use to create your own data set for your own language or symbols. And uh, just note that if you are creating using pencil and paper, I'd suggest creating a very 10 by 10 grid of characters, taking a picture of that and processing it before writing a whole page and spending time on writing that. So that's just not, because this is difficult. If you can do it on screen, that's much easier. Any software that has a grid uh, view, it'll work. This is just description of the data that I just talked about. So the original images that are saved by the code are I think 300 to 400 pixels, 300 by 300 pixels. But in processing, we won't be using that resolution. We'll in when working on this code, I started out with 8 by 8, then went up to 16, and with 64 I got decent results. So in this video I've stuck with 64, but for your practice I'd suggest starting with 8 by 8 and see how the results build up as the resolution increases. The reason why 8 by 8 didn't work is because uh, if you go back and look at one of these characters, so this character looks like a small dot if the resolution is too small, and so it's not able to, it doesn't have enough information to distinguish between either this character, sorry, either this character or this character or this. They all look the same because they are almost similar except for this one extra line right here. So those are just few things to keep in mind when working on this. And if you do have any questions, uh, please let me know comment section below, and I'll be happy to answer as best as I can. So let's get started. These are the libraries that we'll be needing. Important libraries are cluster, then we have manifold. So this will be used for clustering, and this will use for the manifold modeling. Now the DPI of the screen that you have, you can find it, and you'll need to replace this value by the DPI of your screen. This is the DPI on the current computer that I'm working on, and the reason why we need this DPI is while saving the file as a JPEG for each character, this is used in calculation to convert it to either 8-byte or 16-byte or 64 by 64. So this value would be important. Then what you want to do next is set the path for the project. And here I've created a folder named handwriting, and I'm gonna save all the files in that particular folder. And here is the list of subfolders that will go inside that folder. So A, B, C, D, E, those are simple and easy to remember. So I've just added those. And then there are these two functions. So the first function is split page. So what this does is it takes the entire page and starts at top left corner at 0, 0, then moves towards the right along each pixel row and it takes jumps of 75 pixels, and after 75 pixels it takes that particular 75 0 0 and 75 75 and crops that and puts that as a JPEG image and save. So that's how it is saved, and it'll iterate through all the rows and iterate through all the columns to save all the images. So depending on that if you are creating the data set by yourself, after you scan or take picture of the handwritten page, what a scan, or if you write it on a screen, you'll have a JPEG of that. So what you want to do is find what is the best value of blank pixels between each of those letters, each of those characters, and you would you'll have to replace this value of 75 by that exact value, so that as we traverse through each row of that image, we take the calculated jumps so that we don't accidentally cut any letter in half. We need the entire letter or character intact in the center of the image that we will be using in our data set. So that's what this function does. It splits the image page, and after uh, that is split, this is another function which saves it to saves as a JPEG. So here what we are doing is uh, picking each of those characters from that big page and putting the numpy array of that character into a temp list that's here. So we initialize a blank list, and so in SafePig we are using that list and then picking each item from that list and saving it as a JPEG by the pixel value that we specify. And so that's what we are here. We are creating the data directory, and then we are saving the new image within the data directory at the path that is specified here, and that is based on the name of the file. So we have the file, as you will see if you download it, the files are named a.jpg, b.jpg, and so on. So we are picking the name of the file of the uh, large image as a subfolder name. And next here what we have is a, a set where we are going to save all the functions that we have created above and specify the value of the small size images that we need for each character. So if we want to create 64 by 64 pixel images of each character, then I'm writing 64 here. Again, I'd suggest starting out with 8 instead of 64 so that you can get the code running. And once you know that everything runs well, everything is set, then you can go ahead and increase the pixels, because that will save you a time as uh, time when running this code. So here we are iterating through the list of, of, of files, and for each file then uh, so this is the list of the large images that we have in the handwriting folder. So that's we pull the so that's this particular folder. We are reading these images now. So each image that has 704 characters or letters. So we read that image, and then we'll split that image. We get the image list back, which is a list containing items where each item is an array of a smaller image that is of size 64 by 64. So it's like 64 by 64 array, and we send that array out to that list out to save fig function, and save to fig then converts that array into a physical image and saves it on the on your in that subfolder. So as you iterate through all the images, here you get the list of images that are saved, number of images that are saved in each of the subfolders. So we have in this case 704 images on each of those large pages. So we get 704 smaller 64 by 64 images in each of the subfolders. So once we have this, what you essentially have is you have these images ready now. So these are the images generated by code. So you should by now see A through L subfolders within data, and 704 files within each of those 12 subfolders. Next, uh, next step is then to read the images in the subfolders and save those as arrays in capital X variable, and the targets or their labels, true labels, in Y. So if you are doing clustering, we won't need the labels Y except for the evaluation stage. But when we do classification, we can use the labels, the target labels Y. So here what I'm doing is initializing empty array called data, and let me see if I've used it in empty array data, and then initializing I, then we have the image directory path, and then there's this folder that walks through the entire all the directories, uh, all the subfolders within the data folder, reads each image, converts it to, so here we are doing that, reading, taking the subdirectory, taking the file list, then within each file list, so that would be within each subdirectory, we take the file name, we open it, and so we read the file, and because it after reading it can have 3 channels, we just need one channel, just a binary image, so that's why we have a 0 here. And then what we want to do is uh, the 64 by 64 image, we want to unravel it and put it as a single line in the array X and in the data set for array X. So essentially in the end, what we are doing is each stacking images in rows, and each row is a single image where the array is expanded into a row. So let's say if you have a 2 by 2 array, so there are four values in there. So what we are essentially doing with the ravel is, instead of a 2 by 2, we are now converting it to 1 by 4 array, and then we stack 1 by 4 below another 1 by 4, and so on. So if we stack 10 such values, then we have 10 by 4 as the value. So here That's what we are doing. We are stacking them. And then for y, what we are trying to do is adding the appending the values of the file names, and the values of file names should be a, b, and c, and those values we can later on use encode to numeric values. And that's what we are doing here. We have the values x, y, and again we have the values x and y. And do remember to close the image that is created here after image read, because after we are done reading the images, saving it as an array, we do not need it to be open, so we can go ahead and close that image, and that's what we are doing here. Next, this is the y main and y copy. So here what we are trying to do is we have a label encoder. So using that we are converting, let's say the file name is a, or the label name is a. So we are converting all a's to zeros, b's to ones, c's to twos, and so on. So what that's what we get here after we perform the transform. And the reason why we have x main and y main is because in some parts of the code we won't be using the entire data set, and so but the variables still are named x and y. So if we want to go back to the original data set which has all the images, then we can simply get that from a copy of y main or x main. So that's our. So as you can see, we have 8448. So that is, if we do a calculation here, we have 704 images, and if we multiply that by 12, we have these many images, so these many rows. And if we multiply 64 by 64, that's the 4096. So we have 4096 features, that is columns, and 8448 rows in the entire data set. And here this is a variable d where we have saved that image data in three-dimensional array as shown here. The reason for that is because we use that particular uh, three-dimensional array in parts of the code to either plot or do some calculations. And here we can check what the labels were assigned by the label encoder to each of the character types. So for A we have 0, B we have 1, and so on. So if you go back and look on this, not on this slide, but so here, so these are the labels here in orange that are assigned to each of these characters, and that's what we have here. Now to get started, as I said before, the code, I've already run the code because it takes a while to run the code. And so here I'm just going to walk through and explain what the code is talking about. So here we have x main, and so taking the copy of x, we have y, and transforming scaling x. So because we are working with distances, we want to scale or normalize the the values for pixels, and so that's what we are doing here. And just before we move on, I'm guessing you are wondering how the characters look like after we import them. So we can check that. If you type plt.imshow, and here we can pick uh, let's say first row, that is the first image, and all the columns, and we need to reshape this as 64 by 64 because that's what the dimensions are for that image. And then if you say plt.show, we should see, and here to get that as a binary you can say cmap is equal to gray. And so that's the character that we have now for the first row of the array x, and so on. If you look at, let's say 1000, then we have this particular character, and so on. Next, let's look at these functions that we'll be using for uh, plotting. So this function plot projected vectors. So what this is doing is we have the data set that is in 64 by 64. So we have 4096 dimensions and we cannot view that. So what we are going to do by these methods is project all those data points onto a two-dimensional space, and then we can visualize and plot that two-dimensional set of data points. And when we do that, these are the methods that will be used. These are uh, first is the random sparse projection. The next one is truncated SVD. Then we have linear discriminant analysis, Isomap. Then LLE, locally linear embedding. Then modified locally linear embedding. So this should be modified. Yeah, we have the modified right here. MDS, spectral embedding, t-SNE, and neighborhood component analysis. So we have gone through the intuition of these in previous videos. So this is now where we get to implement all those methods. And I'll come back to this function as after we go from this code. So here, this particular list, we are calling this list right here, and from this list, each list has item. So the list has several items, and each item has tuple. So each tuple has this name, which is this one, and a model, which is this part. And so depending on what name is, we are performing the fit and then calling the function to plot. So for plotting, we input the value of x, scale it, and uh, and then we are plotting the text. So we are not plotting the dots, but we are plotting the text values in the plot. And the reason for that is it's easy to see directly the labels that we have assigned for each of those characters, and then we'll color it by the values in y. And the x ticks and y ticks, they are blank because I will get a nice square border around the image. If you put plt.axis off, then we don't get that border. So this is nice to have, and then we have the title right there. Some of the models will require a number of neighbors, and therefore we have, for example, here we have for locally linear embedding, we need a number of neighbors. So that's why I've put a value as 30. You would change it to 50. Again, for figure size, depending on the type of data you are working on, or just to explore, you could change the figure size as well, or you could change the fonts, etc., and see how you can make the image more clear. Again, within this particular area, for each of those models, most of the values are default, and I've just put the n components as 2 so that we can plot it in 2D. You could plot this in 3D, and I'm sure it will give a better uh, visual experience on how the characters are spread out in 3D space. So you could try experimenting with that as well. Okay, so with that, there is final model here, which is uh, random trees embedding, and you could run that and see how that looks as well. So after you run this, I've already run this, and it takes a while. It for me it took around, I think, 20 minutes or so. So after this runs through, these are the images we see, and let's walk through these. So this is a random projection, and here everything is mixed. We cannot kind of see any clusters. This is PCA or the SVD, and here again it's all mixed on one big blob here. Then with LDA we do start seeing clusters, and this is pretty cool plot. So here, as we can see, we have these two clusters that are close by, these two close, and these two are out here, and these orange, red, violet, green, and gray, all these are closer on this side. The red is on the outside. So if we now try to compare what each of these numbers mean, okay, so here let's say we have 6 and 7. So 6 and 7, so these two characters, they look similar, except for this extra line up top here. They both are same, and therefore it makes sense that those two are clustered together on this side. Now if you look at 1, so 1 is this one, and so that is separated out here. Next we have 2. So the difference between these two characters is just this additional line on top of it, and that uh, LDA was able to identify that, and so it moved that cluster up top here, which is we see in blue. Now these points, which is 0, 5, 10, and 3. So we have 0, 0, 5, 10, and 3. So all these have the structure which looks like a 3 in all of those, and so those are clustered right here. And 11 is this one, so this is separated out. And finally we have 8 and 9. So 8 and 9, so we have this different writing. As you can see, the letters are completely different from the rest, and so that cluster is separated out up here. And within those two, between those two, again we see that number 9, which is this one, does not have this curve on the top, and here we can see that the model is able to capture that and put it as a separate cluster, as we can see here. Although there is some overlap, but it's nice to see that the model is able to identify the features within each of those characters that were handwritten, and create these awesome clusters. Next we have Isomap, and Isomap again, in this case with these settings that we have, it looks like one big blob in the middle. For locally linear embedding, again, there's not much to see. Same thing for LLE. For manifold MDS, again, we have the same issue. Now for spectral embedding, uh, we see the data is spread out, but it's all mixed together. We see the 9s up here, 9s and 8s on this particular edge, and then 7, 0, 3, 5. So 7 is this 7, 0, 3, 5. So all the 3 looking letters are on this side, and completely different ones are on the other side. And the middle we have, most of them are 10, 11, which are these. So it's hard to make out what the clusters are in this case. Now with t-SNE, this is an interesting plot. We do see some clusters that are perfectly separated, while others are not. And here we have this letter 8, 8 and 9, 8, 9, 10. I think 8, 9, 10 are very well separated. So we have 8, which is this one, 9, which is this one, 10, which is this one. So those are very well separated. And we have 1 and 2 that are clustered together. So let's see what 1 and 2. Okay, so the difference between these two characters is just the presence of this line up top here in case of the character with label 2. And so that makes sense. So these are clustered together. And then there is this giant cluster with letters 6, 7. So we have 0, 5, 6, 7. We also have 4. So 0, 4, 5. We also have 3. So 0, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's see what those are. We have 0, which is this one. 0, 4, 5, 6, 3, 7. So uh, all these letters that have this tree like structure in the beginning, um, all of them are grouped together in this one giant cluster. And within this cluster, although it is grouped together, there is still uh, these there are still these six sixes, which is these that have two lines on the top. Those are separated out on down here in that cluster, whereas the zeros are up top there. Most of them are up top there. So maybe you could try uh, uh, changing the resolution. Maybe if you go to 128 instead of 64, or even higher if your computer allows that, then maybe you could get separation in these clusters as well. Or uh, another alternative could be fine tuning the model, or doing some other modifications to the data before processing it further. NCA, again, we cannot see any clusters other than the one. And again, with random forest, we do not see any clusters. Everything is just one big blob. So that was for manifold learning. That TS. So in the end, we can see that this t-SNE and LDA gave us. I'd say LDA gave the best clusters, and then t-SNE is right here. Now let's move on and look at clustering. So in clustering, we have covered these topics in previous videos. So here we have two functions. The first function is get cluster matrix. So we talked about all these matrix, and here what we have is a tuple as item in the matrix underscore list, and within each tuple we have the name of the metric, and then we have the code to calculate that metric. And so when we call this function for each model, it will give us all these metrics. And here plot cluster. So here again we are trying to plot the cluster that we create after fitting the model. And now, as I said earlier, uh, for clustering, I tried using the entire data set, but it didn't give uh, good values for the model evaluation, that is the RAND index or adjusted RAND index. So what I've done is narrowed down the set of images that are dissimilar, so that at least we get to see how the evaluation metrics work with this type of data. I suggest you could try picking different characters, or you could try running the whole data set and see if you can improve these evaluation metrics. So here we have these three labels, 2, 9, and 6. So that would be this character, 2, 9, and then we have 6. So we are picking 2, 9, and 6. And they are completely different. And we saw that they are clustered together, clustered separately in the manifold learning graphs that we saw earlier, plots that we saw earlier. So they should work fine here with clustering as well. So we have those. And now then the total number of records or total number of rows we have is just 2112. So we just have 2112 images to work with, and each image is a 64 by 64 image. So we have 4096 columns for each row. Now to get the clusters, here's the code for that. So first, some of the methods do require we specify the number of clusters. So here because we know the number of clusters is 3, I'm just using that information to see if we can find those 3 clusters and see how the metrics look. So for the clusters, we also need bandwidth. So for example, for MeanShift, we need the value for bandwidth, and that is what we are calculating here. Now, the quantile 0.99 may not make much sense here, but I tried starting out with 0.25 quantile and then varying the number of samples to see if it can improve the value for evaluation metrics. However, it did not, so I left it at that. I could try changing the values that are written here and see if you get different results with either this data set or any other data set that you are trying to work with. So we have a MiniBatch, KMeans, Affinity, Propagation, MeanShift, Spectral clustering, Agglomerative clustering, DBSCAN, optics, and BIRCH. So except for the last one, we have covered all these in the previous videos. So I'm sure you are excited to see how these work. Let's get started in this particular for loop now. So we loop over this entire model list again as in previous case. We get the name and model, and then based on if that particular model or method has the labels attribute, we use the labels as ypred, else we use the model to predict the value for y, and then use that ypred value for metrics. Because if you remember, some of the metrics do require that even in unsupervised learning, if you want to evaluate the clustering algorithm, you have to manually go in and label each of those records to see how the clustering algorithm is working. And in this case, because we created the images ourselves, we do know their labels, and so we can use that as true labels and compare it with these predicted labels to see how the clustering algorithms are performing. So here then after we run this again takes a while. So for me it took about I think 5 or so minutes. The true number of clusters is 3, and here we can see for MiniBatch K-means we get a value of 0.57 uh, for the RAND score, and then for adjusted RAND score we have 0.16, which is pretty low. Then the values for mutual information score, adjusted MI score, homogeneity, completeness, V measure. Then we have the FMI score, silhouette score, Kalinsky, Harbaz score, and Davies Baldwin score. So, and for each of these scores, I've also mentioned what the score indicates. If the value is high, is it good or bad? For example, this value, the best perfect clustering would have a value of 1. 0.57 tells that it's not as good, but the adjusted value is much lower, so I'd say the clustering is not good at all. Then for affinity propagation, we just have 3 clusters and the method has found 228 clusters. So again, uh, this does not add up. And another point to note here is that the way these methods interpret the labels could also be different. So here we can see that the RAND score is 0.69, but then the adjusted ARI, so the ARI score is 0.11, still much lower. and so on for the others. So these are the metrics you can check out. For spectral clustering, we get a decent score, 0.77 for the ARI, and uh, again for V measure we have 0.75. Then agglomerative clustering, again we are 0.7. DBSCAN, we have 3 clusters and the -1 indicates noise level. Again the values are pretty low here, and same thing here, the value is almost 0. For BIRCH, it's pretty good, I'd say. We have 3 clusters found, and so remember for BIRCH we did not have to specify the number of clusters, and it did find 3 clusters. Oh, sorry, we did specify, so I take that back. So number of clusters, so this is a typo there. So we have 3 clusters, and the adjusted rand score is for 0.47. So that's those are the values for clustering, and you could go back and change these values and run the code again. Maybe use a smaller sample or larger sample and see if that makes a difference. For spectral clustering, you would change the number of neighbors here and see if that makes a difference. For agglomerative clustering, you could change the linkage type that is used and see if that makes a difference. And for DBSCAN, this could be tricky, finding the EPS and minimum number of samples to get the number of clusters that you're looking for. So the way I found these two was iterating through. I put a number for two nested for loops. I goes from 1 to 100 and j goes from 1 to 200, and break that loop whenever it finds 3 or 4 clusters. So that's the way I found these two values, but it's just experimentation. You could try different ways to find those two values that give you the best clustering. Now for agglomerative clustering, I'll, I have code here that we can look in further detail and look at the plots as well. So this part of the code, again I'm pulling the y data from the main. We are just getting three types of characters or alphabets here, and here is the code. We have the spectral embedding. We fit to x, and then here we are changing the we are changing the linkage. So the first one is ward, and then we have average, complete, and single. And so that's what we fit here on XS, which is from here. And then we perform get the matrix and do the plotting. So here with ward, we can see that we get a pretty good RI score and ARI score at 0.7. And again, the V measure is again 0.73. For average, we get even higher score, 0.9 to 0.79. So as you can see, if we limit the data to the types of images that are visually separable, so we can see they are completely different, then we get a better score. And that's because, as we'll see, is because it's able to identify and find those clusters very well. Then for complete linkage, we have 0.81, but the adjusted RI score falls down. For single linkage, we have very low RI score. Here are the plots for ward. We have really nice clusters. We have one cluster here, so this could have been up to here because these are all sixes. So we have 6, 2, and 9. So 6 is this, 2 is this, and 9 is this. So 9 is very well separated. There is overlap between 2 and 6. So these two. But still, except for this part, I think this area is very well separated. We zoom out. Okay. Then for average, we do see nice clusters. We have 6, 9, and 2. There is small overlap here between 2 and 6, and some with 9. For complete the clustering, it does find 3 clusters, but then the 6 is not identified correctly. So the 2 goes in, 2 and 6 are almost treated as the same cluster. And then with single linkage, we just looks like we just have one cluster there. And so that's maybe 2. There's one blue 6 here. And one blue, one magenta 9. So there are 3 clusters, but then this one large cluster takes up all the data points, which does not make sense. Now moving on, I hope until now you got flavor of how the handwritten text can be used in clustering and clustering we using the manifold and the other techniques. Now we look at classification, which is we are now getting into supervised learning area, where we'll pull the entire data set again. So we have 8448 records and the same number of columns. We split that into train and test set. I've made sure that this is set to shuffle is equal to true, because when creating the X, we did have them stacked on top of each other. So it's important that we shuffle them if we are splitting the data set. And here we have the train images. So randomly chosen 6 images. So we have a true label 6, 4, 3, 1, 5, and 8. So these are the letters. And the idea then would be to classify and see what labels we get in the classification. So here is the classification model. This is using, so this can be commented out, because with the same variable I'm running the random forest classifier. So there are other methods listed here. You could run those, or you could run other classifiers that we looked at in this series. Put them here, just run one by one and see, have fun with what the results you get in the classification. These are then we perform the prediction, and these are the predicted labels. So the predicted, and these are the test images. So true label is 1, predicted label is 1. So it seems in this particular case, all the labels were identified correctly. And so for example, true label 1, predicted label 1. So if we go back here, so the true label is 1 for that particular character, and we do see the prediction as 1. And for classification report, here we can see the accuracy is 0.93, so that's pretty high. One thing that could be done here is changing the test size. So if you change this to, let's say, 0.5 and run it again, that may change the accuracy and bring it down if this is overfitting. And finally, we have the confusion matrix. As we can see here, we have the true labels on the y-axis, predicted labels on the x-axis. The diagonal shows the values that were correctly classified for each of those labels, and the off diagonal numbers show that the values that were incorrectly classified. So for example, 0, which is the label this one, so that particular character was incorrectly classified as 3, 4, 6, and 1. So 3, then 4, 6, and 1. So 3 makes sense because it does look like that. 4 and 6 also makes sense. It does look the initial three just looks similar, but this seems little off, but we just have one case of that, so that's okay. And similarly for the other characters. So here again, let's just for fun, we can try to change value, and let's say if we put 0.5 and run this again, uh, see what output we get. Okay, so the reason why this happened is because in this case, in previous run, I used only 3 characters, uh, and so we need to run this, then run this, so we get all the characters, and then run through the entire set again. It'll take a while, but we'll just see. And it dropped a little bit, not much. We are at 0.91 now, still above 0.9. So that's pretty good for classification. So I hope in this video you had fun not only learning about the implementation of manifold models, clustering models, classification models, but also working on a real world data set that was created from scratch. I'd encourage you to create your own data set in language of your choice or any symbols of your choice. Create a data set, then run it through this code to split that one page of images into smaller images, and then run that data set through all the models, see what difference it makes. And I'm positive that you'll learn a lot from this exercise, is because uh, small changes in variations in each of those images in the data set makes a huge difference while training the model. And you'll see several edge cases as well. So for example, in this image, if there is even a small dot here, it can throw off the code. So uh, kind of getting getting an um, experience on what real world data, uh, how complicated it can become, even for a simple task such as this one, where we just have a couple of characters that we are trying to classify into clusters, or uh, create clusters out of those, or classify them based on the labels that they have. So please let me know in the comments below if you like this video, what you liked about this video, and uh, what your experience was when you tried working on your own data set. How did that go? And maybe you could share what you learned from that others could also use. Please like, share, and subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next video. Thank you.